Welcome back to the Obsession Beast Parent Education Level 1 course. We are now in class number 7. We are chopping this thing along. We're getting there. Hopefully you're taking a lot of value from this, and obviously I really appreciate your time, energy, and attention and buy-in to learning and improving. Growth mindset is important. It doesn't matter the age, and I'm here to help you guys learn and make better decisions along the way. So let's jump into class 7, and we're talking about today why the United States has dominated basketball for years. And the question in front of us is, how does soccer and basketball have any correlation amongst each other? And that's a really good question. And you're going to find out why there is correlation between soccer and basketball outside of just being a sport that people play. And that's what this class is going to break down, and how it can tie back to youth development and dominating, or I should say, producing better players in the long run. So the first step is cultural buy-in. In the United States, basketball is basically, and this might not be the correct term for it, but is accepted. Everybody plays basketball or is involved with basketball. People love basketball. Let's just put it that way. And I'll give you this as a reference note. Like, I am probably the most un-American American, as when I was a kid, the only sport that I was ever interested in was soccer, what we know it as here. I call it football, and futsal. That was it. I didn't have any interest in any other sports. I did try basketball. I did try baseball, but they did not stick, and that shows. But with the whole point of cultural buy-in, though, with the United States, there are literally courts everywhere. You can travel to maybe not every single public park where there are courts, but you'll see kids and or adults playing all the time. There are no referees and no parents in the street, because it's street play. That's what it's called. And the greatest thing about it is there's basically no barrier to entry. However, there is one barrier, and that is if there's a bunch of people playing, you got to have skill level. That's key. So it's going to be, which you'll find out here shortly, and this slide here kind of highlights the whole thing. Privilege and money have no say on the court. Everyone is equal, except the difference is, and before I show it to you, I want you to think about it. What do you think the difference could be? If privilege, money, background, heritage, and everything is equal in that sense, because you're on the court, the difference is what? And you might think physical. That's not what I'm highlighting here, but you'll find out in about 3, 2, and 1. It's survival of the fittest, and skill is a prerequisite. Now, it's actually interesting. Have you ever heard of a club called AC Milan? They're in Italy. They were historically one of the biggest clubs in the world. And I was watching one of their games the other day, and they have the locker rooms, and then they have a tunnel. So you have to go from the locker rooms to the tunnel to walk out to the field. And in the tunnel, there's a writing. I don't remember the exact wording of it, so I'm going to paraphrase it, but it basically says, talent means nothing. Whoever is hungrier will win. So the second line here where it says, and skill is a prerequisite. What that means is you can't play if you don't have skill. So the following line, how bad do you want it, is the whoever is hungrier piece that I was mentioning a second ago on AC Milan's wall in the tunnel. And that's why survival of the fittest is key. And this is why throughout possibly generations, we have developed top level basketball players. Maybe not the same now, but in the 90s, the 80s, early 2000s, we were developing, and maybe even before that, unbelievably good basketball players. And I don't have all the education with basketball, but what I am trying to highlight is these processes that we've already talked about. Now, let's keep it going, and I think you'll understand why. The game of basketball is always 1v1 to 5v5. Now, you're probably thinking, where is Kyle going with this? It's a good question. Really, really good question. The key is, we look at kids today in the United States that play and get introduced to soccer, or what I call football. They start off, typically, at least I should say, the first year of competitive, they're playing 7v7. And then we wonder why we struggle with the adaptation to this. Now, I don't want to go too far into this because it's going to come up shortly, but I want to put that thought in your brain to think about, okay? Let's stay tuned with basketball for a second. So the game is always 1v1 to 5v5. It never goes above that, even at the pro level. Okay, so just keep that in the back of your mind. So what does that mean when it comes to the court, outside of survival of the fittest? You're going to have players that get more touches on the ball. They're going to have to make more decisions because they're constantly receiving or having to move and adjust their play. They're going to play all moments of the game. So that's same thing in soccer. That's attacking, transition to defending, defending, and transition to attacking. Those are all going to remain inside of this. It's not going to change. And then, of course, like I said, survival of the fittest. Now, you could probably think of a couple more, but we don't need to go into too much detail with this. But those 4 things are key. And obviously, with the cultural buy-in, it's possible. Now, I want to give you some percentages here about the responsibility to win or lose. Now, this is key because I don't think people quite understand this. So if you look at it's not a table, but if you look at the numbers here in front of you, we have 1v1 to 5v5. So this can be translated to soccer as well, or any sport. It doesn't even matter really. But if we look at a game, and let's say using basketball, you play a 1 versus 1 on a court. 100% of responsibility, if you're playing, is on you to either win or lose. So we drop down the 2v2s now. So it's 2 players versus 2 players. You now share responsibility 50-50. We've already cut it in half by adding the player. Now we go to 3. 3v3 now is 33.333% repeating essentially. So it's really 33.34%. So the point is we're still going down, but the percentage is still relatively high, which means the player has responsibility to win or lose. And you're going to see how this goes forward in a moment, with 4v4 being 25%, 5v5 being 20%. So we're looking at kind of game-changing numbers here, because if you think about a 1v1, me versus you as the example, I have every single or 100% of that responsibility to beat you, or I'm losing to you. I can't blame it on anybody else. However, when you start adding players, then you can immediately drop to the aspect of it's this guy's fault, this person's fault, whatever it is. So I'm just trying to present this option to you. And what I see is, especially in youth soccer, which I need to hold it, how does this translate to youth development? Okay, your child probably plays 77 or 9v9. Now, in a second, I'm going to show you the percentages, which might come to a surprise to you, and you might be like, wow, I didn't even think about this. And you're probably already thinking like that from the previous slide about the percentages. But your child, when they lose games, it's very easy because of the numbers in 77 or 99 to either blame somebody else, blame a teammate, blame the coach, blame the referee, whatever it is, versus saying, you know what, I needed to step up and I needed to do better. And this is where I'll go back for a second, looking at the percentages, and this is why I am so big on 1 versus 1. Because when you play 1v1, realistically, you can't blame anything or anybody else. Sure, could a player potentially say, oh, well, I tripped on the grass, it's the grass's fault? Sure, there are exceptions to the rule. Fine. But where I'm going with this is, in 99.9% of cases, there is no exception to the rule, and you have to deal with the consequence of winning or losing, and it's on you. So let's look at the percentages now. 77, 9v9. Here are the percentages. 77 is 14% responsibility. This has now dropped significantly, even from 5v5. It was 20%. Now it's 14%. So that's not much responsibility at all. And this will lead to the point at the bottom here where it says players get pigeonholed, which means a coach will say, you're going to play goalkeeper only, you're going to play striker only, you're going to play center back only, whatever the position is. And that is the position that you are going to lock up, which means you're only playing basically at maximum 50% of the game. Because if you're a center back, as the example, and you only ever play center back, you're basically only going to be defending and transition to defense. There will be some elements of attacking, but you don't get to experience the full flow of it because you're stuck playing defense. Especially in the American model, your child will be stuck playing defense and told, you can't go over half, you need to stay back to deal with the counterattack, or whatever the circumstances. So that's very important. And then if you look at 9v9, the percentage drops to 11.11 repeating, or 111 repeating percentage. Again, even smaller numbers. Like, you can see that the lower percentage happens because higher numbers of players on the field. So I'm big on this with responsibility. And this is why it's so important. But here's the thing about the pigeonhole. So we can see the part about pigeonhole, right? Being stuck in one position. If we go back to 1v1 to 5v5, if you play any of these numbers, the chance of you being pigeonholed decreases dramatically. In fact, in 1v1, it's intrinsically impossible to be pigeonholed to do one side, because if you just defend, you can't score, right? If you do 2v2, you could argue and say one guy could stay back and one guy could attack, but you're probably not winning in that case, because if that's the case, it's very hard for one player as an attacker to beat two defenders. You see where I'm going with this? So let's go to 3v3. Same idea. If you don't use all three to attack and defend, it's almost impossible to win. Or I should say intrinsically impossible. Now again, same thing, 4v4 and 5v5. If all the players are not participating in attacking and defending, it makes it very, very hard to win the games. And that's why for me it's so important, and this is what basketball, in my opinion, or I should say why basketball has dominated for years: cultural buy-in, the survival of the fittest aspect. We have courts everywhere that people can go play on. Like I live in Orlando, Florida, and I can drive to a local park, and if there's a basketball court, more than likely it's full with people. So it's just a non-stop fest, so to speak, of just basketball, and more basketball. And then, it leads to the next question, next thought, and we wonder why the United States doesn't develop top players. Well, we just need to look at this chart right here. We have basically 7, 8, 9, and 10-year-olds playing, and it goes up to 11 as well, and even potentially 12, playing 7v7 and 9v9. So let's take the 7, 8, and 9-year-old. Kids that are maybe 1 year or 2 years into the sport in competitive, and they already have 7 players versus 7 players. So the maximum amount of responsibility that they have is 14%. That's crazy to think about. Like, in my perspective, that's nuts. There's no way that should be acceptable. But that's what it is. That's the environment that we have, unfortunately, with U.S. soccer. But this is why I'm advocating for this, because I'm trying to help you guys make better decisions with this. And again, we wonder why the United States doesn't develop, and when I say top players, I'm talking about world class. Think about that book I told you about from Sir Alex Ferguson, where he only had 4 world-class players at prime time, peak Manchester United. So let's learn from basketball. As a group, let's learn from it. They have cultural buy-in, survival of the fittest, which means winner stays on type of mentality. There are courts everywhere that are just open to the public that people can go play on. They never go above 5v5. From young kids to adults, it stays 5v5. And obviously it goes as low as the 1v1. Now, there's basically on the courts, when we're talking about cultural buy-in and courts being everywhere, there are no parents really managing it, maybe except for a clock. There's no referee, and there's no coach involvement. So this is why I called it earlier the street. Kids are playing and adults are playing in the street. Okay? They get to experience multiple positions, and they're involved in all phases of play. Like this right here, these 6, 7 points right here should be all you need to see and know to understand that if your child is going to have the best opportunity to get to the highest level, they have to be able to dominate 1v1, 2v2, 3v3, 4v4, and 5v5. If they can't do that first, then there's nothing to even consider looking at this one with 7v7, 9v9, or even 11v11. Like you're talking, it's unreasonable to expect somebody to do well in 7v7 if they can't do well in 5v5. And I think that's a fair thing to say. It is unreasonable to expect somebody to be, let me say that again. It is unreasonable for a player to be expected to do well in 7v7, 9v9, or 11v11 when they can't do well in 1v1, 2v2, 3v3, 4v4, 5v5. If they can't do those well, how can we expect a player to survive and perform well in 7v7, 9v9, or 11v11? Like, I want you to really think about that. It's intrinsically impossible. So that's why it's so important for me that we use this and manage it. Now, my recommendations are the following. And think about these key elements. Is your child maximizing their time in 1v1, to 5v5 play? Are they? And the only person that can determine that is you, especially at the younger age groups. How involved are parents, coaches, and referees, aka the adults, in their play? If coaches, I'm not talking about training, I'm talking about their play. Now, part of training is play. So when the play factor comes in, let the players play and enjoy the game, right? That should be important. But when it comes to game day or free play, let the kids play. Now, you also need to understand why survival of the fittest is key. Think about sport in general as a pyramid. It's going to go like this, or like you can call it a funnel if you want, a funnel. It's going to go like this. And where I'm going with this is survival of the fittest is the funnel. It's way bigger at the bottom, and then you're funneling up like this. So a certain percentage of players will go from the bottom to the next level. Then that number gets smaller to the next level. Then the next level gets even smaller. Then the next level gets even smaller. And then you're going to have the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, 5 players make it from that 100 players to the 1%. And that's how it's going to work. That's why survival of the fittest is so important. Now, really think about, maybe you take a screenshot, maybe you wrote these numbers down, but the percentages, you need to understand how important this is. The percentages is like a gold mine of information. Like, you need to understand the importance of the small numbers, because the small numbers is what's going to make the biggest difference in the long run for your child. And if you don't believe me, you're going to find out in a couple of years, if they only play 7v7 and they're pigeonholed, your child is either going to want to quit or they're going to struggle to adapt when they start getting to 15 years and older, when the exposure piece really, honestly matters. So keep that in the back of your mind. I hope that makes sense. I hope you enjoyed this class. A lot of information to kind of go through and think about. But without further ado, guys, we keep it running. We will see you guys in class number 8, and we get back to work.